Looking for a dragon to absolutely dunk on players who act more and more like murder hobos with every passing session? Well, let me tell you what. Diamonds may be good for rings and resurrections, but sapphires are perfect for team party killing. This gym dragon bamfs into today's TPK or bust with auditory attacks and sublime spell choices. The video series where I evaluate the dragons of 5th edition from all their cool combat abilities, deadly breath attacks, and flavorful skills. All this work is for the sole purpose of rating each legendary lizard from team party killers all the way to ridiculous reptiles who are just a total bust. Chivalry, honor, courage, pride, and strategy. These are the things that define the Sapphire Dragon. It hunts the corruption of the far realms, attacking foreign invaders like the alien Aboleth, the brainy Beholder, or even the eldritch Elderbrain, and all of its evil Mind Flayer minions. It takes great pride in its combat skills and overall physical prowess. The Sapphire Dragon is a savage threat when inside of its element. Speaking of savagery, the Sapphire Dragon's offensive tools are quite the arsenal against those ancient aberrations and aliens alike. Up to bat first is its debilitating breath attack, a cone of high-frequency sound, forcing targets to make a Constitution saving throw or take 44 thunder damage and become incapacitated on a failure. Although the damage off the rip isn't as powerful as the breath attack options of other dragons like green or bronze, the incapacitation feature is chef's kiss, beautiful. I may not enjoy the saving throw being tied to Constitution, but a DC 19 saving throw isn't something to shake a stick at. Often enough, and doubly so considering this actually hits in a 60-foot cone, the Sapphire Dragon will almost always snag a squishy in the radius, and incapacitate at least one person every time. It's a little embarrassing to see that its Wombo combo, dealing a total of 42 damage, is actually lower than the Emerald Dragon, because the Sapphire Dragon is focused on combat prowess and potential, while the Emerald Dragon is more known to be a stealthy, spy-like dragon. But between the two dragons and their breath attack / Wombo combo options put together, I still think the potential incapacitation and a little less damage is far more powerful in my opinion, as status conditions are simply my bread and butter for RPG games, rather than raw damage numbers. But personal preference aside, the book Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, the one the Sapphire Dragon appears in, states it actually has telekinetically attached spines to its tail, but that it has no tail attack to speak of. Now this isn't abnormal, all the gym dragons and Fizbans don't actually get a tail attack, but it's odd that the authors point out its tail and its features explicitly in the book, but then not give it a tail attack option regardless. Kind of odd. The Sapphire Dragon's legendary actions are a toolkit useful in many situations, and it has a flavorful change compared to many other dragons. First, its 3 legendary action points let it choose between the following options in between the turns. First up is a claw attack, dealing fine damage every so often. Its second option is psionics for 2 points, allowing it to cast a spell from its list or use a psychic step, which is a teleport up to 60 feet. I'll discuss the spells, as always, in the skill segment in full. Spoiler alert, they are very good, but teleporting is always very strong for a monster of this size. For 3 points, and its third option, is Telekinetic Fling. It chooses a small or smaller object not carried or held within 60 feet that the dragon can see. It can then fling that object another 60 feet from its original location. Any creature hit by this object needs to dodge by making a DC 17 dexterity saving throw, or take a very painful 31 points of bludgeoning damage. Now this telekinetic fling is actually very powerful, and between the claw attacks and psionics, it makes this dragon extremely flexible in between the turns, and it allows the dragon to push out the damage that it loses on its Wombo combo and on its breath attack. It can now reposition, deal some more damage, use multiple attacks in a turn, or just use magical shenanigans to earn a further advantage in every fight it finds itself in. As it stands, the Sapphire Dragon is a fighter at heart, a devout, militant, and very intelligent combatant with a diverse and well-established knowledge of historical battles and tactics. I can confidently say that this dragon in particular, compared to all the other dragons I've covered in this video series, takes an edge in the offensive category with a specialty: historical combat prowess. History majors rejoice! You now have a monster that will use any and every effective tactic in the book from every era. This can include swordsmanship from a forgotten era when shapeshifted, or something just as wild and wacky from any historical book that you want to bring to the table. Which leads me right into the official offensive score for the Sapphire Dragon. What we have here is a rare gem, gem dragon joke, of a monster, one who uses its skills and abilities to such a refined degree of mastery, I get goosebumps. Its lower damage is stabilized with the telekinetic fling and spellcasting options. Its action economy is filled with everything you could want. It's got bonus actions, legendary actions, layer actions, spells, attacks, breath attacks, layer-based actions, teleportation, movement options, and everything in between that I haven't even got to cover yet. But its biggest issue isn't actually its ability to deal damage or even just keep the edge in strategic movement, but rather when it'll choose to do so. Because surprise attacks, underhanded tactics, and things that seem like cheap shots, well, the dragon's just not gonna do. It wants an honest and fair fight, even if that means not using its own skills and attacks to meet that self-imposed criteria. It will honor and even enjoy a 1v1 on ballsy adventurers who call it out. It'll nerf its own abilities to match the opponent as best as it can. Yes, the Sapphire Dragon does have everything it needs to be deadly. In fact, it has so much pure offensive potential that if not for this very flavorful, yet agitating, personality trait, the Sapphire Dragon easily would have gotten a 10 out of 10. But with its, once again self-inflicted, inability to really go gung-ho on every encounter and use its abilities to the fullest unless certain criteria are met, an offensive score of 8.2 out of 10 is more than generous here. But parties who dishonor themselves with underhanded shenanigans, evil tactics, and foul play against a Sapphire Dragon beware. Its full Unchained abilities are nothing to take lightly, and it will commonly be the death of arrogant parties who mistake honorable combat for mercy. To further supplement its diverse offensive options, the Sapphire Dragon's skill category sprints to a lead with powerful spell options other dragons can only dream of. Getting a 1 time a day of the following spells: Dissonant Whispers, Hold Monster, Meld into Stone, and Telekinesis. Wow! First, just the combination of 3 of these spells in particular are often choice picks for players, telling me everything I need to know about this dragon. It loves combat, and it's good at it too. I want to cruise through these spells quickly, but I will have an image of the full description of the spell on the screen if you want to read them in full. Otherwise, listen along to the general synopsis of each spell, or skip ahead, and how the dragon will thrash any unfortunate murder hobos with these spells. Also, remember, moving forward on this, I'm going to be under the assumption that the dragon will be fighting at its best, not holding back in some way or another. These are exceptions, not the rule. As in the flavor section, we can talk about why this is the case, and why this exception here will make more sense later with supporting context. First up is Dissonant Whispers. Dealing psychic damage and forcing a wasted reaction and a movement is just so beautiful, especially when you remember the wording Dissonant Whispers uses. It states a creature, quote, doesn't move into obviously dangerous ground. Keyword obviously, meaning that if the Sapphire Dragon were to get the creature to move to an area that is trapped, yet well disguised, the creature would still flee into the area as long as it doesn't understand the danger that is there. Coupled with this being on a wisdom saving throw targeting players who are already low on perception, does double duty for this dragon. Now, it could be argued that its personality wouldn't allow such an underhanded trick, if you want to call it that. But in the instances where aberrations and dishonorable parties are involved, I think it's worth remembering all the creative options for skills like this one. Not to mention the damage and saving throw are extremely relevant on its coverage on skills and attacks to certain opponents with strong physical resistances and low magical resistance. And I mean, what else needs to be said on spell number 2? It's Hold Monster, being able to fully paralyze a player turn by turn, and then critically attack them with bites and claws every round, and even make legendary action claw attacks, which are then criticals, makes the spell even more brutal. I'm just imagining that scene from Dragon Ball Z Kai, where Goku gets held in place by Frieza's telekinesis and can do nothing while he gets pinballed around. Not to mention its ability to disable a player fully in a defensive manner, snagging a rogue or a wizard who wants to burst the dragon's HP bar for a few turns means the dragon gets to abuse healers or tanks for a few rounds uncontested. Its third spell, Meld into Stone, is a great get-out-of-jail-free card. It can escape a very sticky situation if necessary, or enable ghost-like movements for its first engagement. Although I can't see this dragon ever using this for a sneak attack, it could still use it to get up close to a target without being seen, and then challenge said creature mano a mano. Not to mention the ability to bring down a cavern on a target with its sonic breath, and then melding into stone to escape the damage is quite powerful on its own right. The Sapphire Dragon's last spell option of Telekinesis happens to be its most flexible and powerful option if used creatively. I could talk for hours about how useful and broken Telekinesis can actually be, but overall, the basic uses for Telekinesis are the following. First, you can grab a person and put them into telekinetic timeout until they break free. 2. You can move an object up to 1,000 pounds either onto an enemy or away from an enemy. 3. You can use a tool or a weapon with finesse from a safe distance. And 4. You can disarm a person and throw the object they are trying to hold 30 feet away. And this is a concentration spell too. Using it every turn you can hold it is just a ridiculous combo when paired with its bonus action to teleport. This makes the dragon very annoying to try to fight in melee combat if it didn't want to. And honestly, with its strategic mind, this would even be more devastating when broken down into a full-sized plan. Imagine the dragon's ability to design its lair with certain pieces of rock that when moved with said telekinesis, fracture into place pitfalls that cascade around the party. You can cause contained ceiling collapses or other nasties to keep the party always guessing which tiles are safe and which one to end a turn on. But I think it's only necessary on the most dangerous of house guests that the dragon deems worthy of its full mental and strategic might. Not to mention, its distaste for using magic in true honorable combat makes these spells far more restrained unless it really lets loose. Its spells are probably the most well-designed out of any dragon spell list I've ever seen, and I would personally have trouble picking 4 different on-theme spells for a dragon like this. Although, once again, the Sapphire Dragon would really rather fight physically than magically. Not that it won't use these magical spells in a fight, but it may not use them effectively or even at all if it has a more honorable method of attack. Luckily, when speaking of its physical skills, the Sapphire Dragon gets an impressive stat block of 23 strength, 14 dexterity, 22 constitution, 18 intelligence, 17 wisdom, and 18 charisma. Its total stat bonuses across the board are very evenly distributed. Excluding the dexterity here, every stat it has happens to be nearly perfect in my eyes. And the 14 dexterity it boasts is still phenomenal for a creature that happens to be huge-sized. We love anything above 10 dexterity in this household. With extremely high mental stats, but nothing excessive, it makes me really believe its obsession for historical combat, documentation, and memorabilia. Like, how it might actually read these texts to learn about how a certain fight was won, or how an army was rebuffed against a weaker foe, a land lost to wartime, and so many other historical secrets it can use for itself later in life. All these things put together make the Sapphire Dragon extremely well made, with its draconic bloodline providing hardy buffs to strength, constitution, and dexterity respectively. This means that every single saving throw it ever makes, proficient or not, is very well protected. There's no real weakness here, no Achilles heel in terms of statistics, as it stands. It's got a little of everything, and that's a huge boon for a dragon like this. But boy, oh boy, do you remember when I mentioned at the beginning of this video that the Sapphire Dragon is a tactical genius with a habit of forming honeycomb-like mazes in its lair? Well, that lair is even better than you think, because it gives it access to 3 powerful lair action abilities, each of which can be used on initiative count 20, those being 1. Awesome Thunder. One creature in the lair the dragon can see must make a DC 15 con save or take 13 damage and become stunned until the end of its next turn, as a thunderous assault of sound attacks the creature. And as crazy OP as this is, if it lands, not to mention the wonderful stunt condition on top, my distaste for lower DC saves and it being tied to Constitution makes this a 50-50 at best against most of the enemies it would want to target anyways. 2. Beguiling Whisper, a gem dragon's specialty. It's able to charm a creature within the lair versus a DC 15 wisdom saving throw. Useful, but I don't see this one happening very often in a fight, especially considering the Sapphire Dragon's pride for honorable combat on the line. And 3, and probably the most commonly used one, is going to be Stone Passage. More stonework shenanigans gives the dragon ease of access into more and more of its lair without having to waste actions or movement options. Its lair is a powerful home field advantage that grants it even more status conditions and movement enablers the dragon can use on its foes. And when mentioning the lair, the Sapphire Dragon's ability to traverse it, alongside use of its latent magical potential, is nearly unparalleled. And that's all thanks to not 2, not 3, but 4 separate movement options, supported again by 2 wonderfully powerful passives. The Sapphire Dragon gets 40 feet of walking speed, a burrow of 30 feet, a climb of 40, and a flight of 80, and all of this is buffed up even further by its passive skills of Spider Climb and Tunneler, allowing it to burrow in solid stone, fly, and climb in a 360-degree area from any location in its lair. Every direction, every floor, every wall, rock, and stone meticulously placed to grant the Sapphire Dragon full main functionality in its lair. The dragon's love for honorable combat is one thing, but reconnaissance is simply part of war. The side most informed will always have a significant advantage, and it isn't afraid to play the long con to gather as much information on a target before challenging them, making its symbiotic relationship with the Emerald Dragon even more interesting to read about, as they work together like a spy and a general to take down powerful aberrations who invade the Forgotten Realms. Now, I have made a mention of its ability to make traps multiple times, and then further contradicted that same statement with its honor-bound nature and love of a fair fight. I believe wholeheartedly that the Sapphire Dragon, when faced with a true threat, a danger that its life is on the line against, would have plans, traps, and contingencies for that situation. Many great generals in history, fictional or not, use every advantage given to them, every resource possible. And even the most historical and memorable of those battles are won by strategy, not just force. I think understanding the line at which this dragon dances on when it comes to honor and tactics is one that dungeon masters need to understand fully to get the most out of this monster. It's not that it uses traps, not those you perv, but the traps that are most advantageous for itself. It only uses them when it's pushed into a corner and finds a strategic reason to do so. An example could be when defending a castle, it is common to pour boiling oil and pepper the enemy with arrows as they try to break down the main gate. This is Siege Tactics 101. I don't think it's dishonorable to use your defensible position and hold against an enemy in this case. Again, what defines honor is a bit loose. Like, to you, the person listening right now, what is honor? What is honorable combat? What is knightly honor? What is lawful neutral? And when running a dragon like this one, what does that mean to be lawful neutral? Making the call and determining what strategies are good and which are bad in terms of honorable combat should be at the forefront of your list when running the Sapphire Dragon. I think it's worth reinforcing the point for everyone listening that the Sapphire Dragon is the knight of dragonkind. It's a duty-bound soldier, a burning soul against the evils in the night. It loves the thrill of physical combat, the feeling of besting a foe on equal footing, and that's its real Achilles heel. Its historical information on combat's long past, and its layer being so well put together, make a dragon that can, and will, design its strategies to protect itself to the highest effectiveness possible against foes it determines to be worth that full effort. But until it determines that, until it comes to that conclusion, it will use reconnaissance to size up its foes, and it will nearly always refuse to go all out. This is such a similar trait to something that the chromatic dragons all have in terms of fatal flaws. It's kind of poetic in a way, that something so powerful almost always holds itself back in one way or another. It very similarly reminds me of Goku, the way that he has all this power, but almost always refuses to go all out at the beginning. He wants to warm up, test his opponent, see what's fun and what's not fun, what's honorable. But in terms of raw numbers, rules, skill sets, stats, and insanely choice spells, makes me believe that the Sapphire Dragon is way more deadly than I first gave it credit for. Because when it rolls up its sleeves, it can really throw down. With literal skill proficiencies in history, perception, persuasion, and stealth, the dragon is very well covered in many departments, and very on point with flavorful skills like persuasion and history being especially nice to see. Look, the dragon has everything, and I do mean everything that I look for in a dragon, and much, much more. And that fatal flaw, being so irritating, just brings more spice to the table. It has extra damage, spells, flavor, skill variety, high stats, movement options galore, normal senses like blind sight and high perception, bonus action options, shape-shifting on a whim, and for Christ's sakes, it gets teleportation and on-theme skills like history and persuasion. Seriously, this dragon earns a 10 out of 10 for skills, and there's no argument here. Fight me if you think otherwise. And speaking of fighting, if you're thinking of fighting the Sapphire Dragon, its defensive rating is quite the stunning number, because it boasts a hearty 225 HP, more than Bronze and Green, but it does have a bit of a lower AC, like the other gym dragons, of 18. The Sapphire Dragon can easily sponge a couple more hits it normally will take with that lower AC. It gets resistances to lightning and thunder, which is a wonderful combination as well, because lightning is one of the highest raw damage options spellcasters get in 5th edition. High lightning bolts, and thunder happens to be another very common burst damage option for classes like paladins and sorcerers specifically. Because it double dips in these two very specific resistances, it really buffs up its longevity in battle. With a super flavorful condition immunity to the frightened condition, I can't help but agree with it. I mean, come on, this dragon fights aliens and corruption and evil all the time. It is a badass force of nature, and I cannot see it being scared of anything. And a reminder that its spells and breath attack, not to mention if we count the layer itself, can apply debuffs and status conditions like paralyzed, incapacitation, it can telekinetically grab you, it can disarm you, and it can do so much more. I mean, seriously, the damage prevention methods for this dragon are only limited by the imagination of the game master running it, and how threatened it feels in combat. And because of those reasons, a plethora of saving throw bonuses from its draconic bloodline, a hardy health bar, a tactical mind, a defensible lair, and so much more, the dragon gets a 10 out of 10 two categories back to back. And honestly, I actually ended up backtracking this entire script once I realized that I wanted to rate a 10 out of 10 for defense here. Like, no other dragon has blindsided me with skills, abilities, and overall potential like this dragon has. I mean, even the Moonstone dragon couldn't pull this out of his hat. It had no damage resistances or immunities, and it had a few other small issues. But this dragon boasts 2 resistances to relatively common damage types, not to mention all of the tricks and tactics up its sleeves to keep it safe. And although less intelligent and perceptive than the Moonstone dragon in this example, the Sapphire dragon can utilize its lair and historical knowledge in such a tangible way, I cannot argue against its sheet. I mean, when I looked for weaknesses to exploit in this dragon, I happened to smack face first into its information network, the Emerald Dragon. Like I mentioned earlier, the Emerald Dragon is known to work with the Sapphire Dragon very closely to observe dangerous threats, and only after gathering a plethora of information, then and only then will it sick the Sapphire Dragon on them. Like, even outside of its lair, hunting a creature down in enemy territory, it has everything it needs to be successful. But just considering the Sapphire Dragon's ability to fall back on historical events and battles, its own skills and attacks supporting its defensive options, its lair, a network of hidey holes and masterfully masoned stonework, makes me marvel at its miraculously made sheet. What a perfectly designed dragon. Hats off to the people at Wizards of the Coast that made this dragon. And lastly, its flavor. And I've been talking up a storm here for the Sapphire Dragon. It is a very, very on-theme dragon that has very few complaints I can make. In fact, the Sapphire Dragon has been nothing but surprise after surprise to learn about. And I have been diligent in covering its duty, its personality, and all the most important key features the Sapphire Dragon has. But this dragon has a few more flavorful facts I want to share before moving on to its final rating. And the Sapphire Dragon has a horde of interesting and wonderful collections. Things like historical artifacts, weapons, armor, documentation, artwork, and even things like sigils, badges of honor, and trophies of hard-won victories. This makes the Sapphire Dragon's lair a place similar to a winding and well-carved-out museum. A literal walk through time, organized in such a way that sometimes only the dragon may truly understand it. I love the way that the dragon is described, a creature with a keen eye for detail, a passion for war, world history, the people in those battles long forgotten, and the truth behind conflicts and the strategies that ended them. Its craving for physical battle makes it rush headlong into fights that it feels honor-bound to take. People or creatures who dare challenge it to a 1v1 are almost always going to goad it successfully. Although this is a common problem for many armies that it may be leading, as sometimes it forgoes tactical formations or sound strategy to sate its lust for battle. And I think it's quite humorous for this honorable dragon to be so self-indulgent sometimes. I mean, this dragon is a very dangerous threat on paper, but in practice it's only like 25 to 35% less effective. I mean, seriously, the more dangerous the threat the dragon faces, the more of that skill set comes to the surface. I think this is such a perfect dragon to run against a party, because the game master gets to sort of set the stage for how the dragon begins the combat, how much heat to throw at them out of the gate. A lot of other dragons are simply monsters. They have intelligence and an ability to do things that other dragons don't, but this one in particular feels very good to attack a party with. It seems like a very perfect anti-party dragon. And it's not often I say that, because a lot of dragons make good villains, but don't make good creatures to attack something with. And this one in particular does that well. I like it. It's the perfect anti-hero for groups a little too headstrong for their own good, a rival to keep them in check, or knock them down a peg or two. I'm not saying you should punish players for playing the game, that's never what you want to do, but sometimes it's nice to have everyone be a little bit more humble to the realm you spent so long building. And this doesn't actually mean that this dragon's evil, it's lawful neutral after all. It can be an ally, a force for good. After all, that's its only interest, to deal with the threats to the Forgotten Realm. But getting in its way is the last thing you want to do. And all of this detail I've spouted out, and I've forgotten to mention that its favorite food is giant spiders, and it magically makes them more common in the area it lives in. This hilariously makes them both allies and enemies to those who worship Lolth, the spider goddess. And honestly, I don't know how to feel about that. But I prefer dragons like this one. Ones with powerful skills and abilities, and philosophies or personalities that temper that power with interesting angles and flavor. And the Sapphire Dragon has plenty of power and flavor to offer any game, as an ally or enemy. This dragon is phenomenal. Its teamwork with other gym dragons is so amazing and very easy to build a story around. Its horde and love for battle make it exceptionally fun to make a real person from this creature, not just a mindless, intelligent quote-unquote creature that you run once or twice, but a real soul inside the dragon, a personality tangible and fun to interact with in your game. Trust me, this one seems very easy to connect with and very flexible. You can run it a lot of different ways, and I highly recommend game masters to sort of like look into this one a bit deeper and really read into this one. It's very, very cool. I love this dragon so much, and I cannot do more to express my interest and respect for a dragon this well put together. Again, hats off to the people at Wizards who made this one. This one is phenomenal. Thank you. To be frank, its overall flavor rating has to be an easy 9.5 out of 10. It is completely worth every moment you spend looking into it. I only wish that I had more information to sink my teeth into. I want more information for how it deals with other dragons like the chromatic dragons or even the metallic dragons. Specifically ones like gold and blue catch my eye, and how it actually moves in on aberrations to take them down, what strategies it employs against creatures that it really deems dangerous. Like, this lack of information can be from how new it is, but I feel like so much is left in the air that I crave a lot more here. And the dragon has had a million things to talk about, but finally, after what feels like an entire castle siege, we arrive at its full combat rating. And wonderfully, the Sapphire Dragon has done nothing but impress me over and over and over and over and over again today. And I love this dragon. As an enemy, as an ally, as an antagonist, a boss, anything you can think of, this dragon can fit. It is such a perfectly put together dragon. Like, honestly, it's perfect. And I have to say, there's very little for me to complain about. Its flavor, its stats, its skills, everything makes me so happy to read. And I am elated to say the Sapphire Dragon gets a stunning 9.4 out of 10 for its total score. I mean, seriously. This dragon can do it all. It can be a team party killer, but it probably wouldn't unless it's pushed into a tight corner, and that makes it perfect to run at the table. It is a fun, thematic, flavorful, and most importantly, fair dragon to run. And it is surprisingly deep as a dragon. There's so much to it. And I cannot recommend that you, as a person, run or have one of these at the table. It is so great. Like, I can't even tell you how ecstatic I am. I'm buzzing with energy right now about this one. And if you enjoy this video series, my funny sounding voice, my energy, my information, and all the editing I put into these videos, leave a like, comment, and sub, and show me your support. Thank you so much for watching it to the very, very, very end of this long video. I know one of my commenters actually asked for this one a while back, and I was happy to really give it my best shot for you, man. I hope anybody else watching this one can use this video for good, or evil, and I'll see you next time. Bye!